This exhibit has a lot of different elements to it. It of course has the drinking element of it. There actually are two bars in the exhibit. There's one that shows drinking life in saloons around the turn of the 20th century. Really a male-dominated institution, the saloon, and it was really the focal point for a lot of the anti-drinking efforts that were going on. Women like Carry Nation, who would literally bring a hatchet and bust up these saloons, are featured in there. There also is the bar that I'm standing by right here, which is a speakeasy bar. Now, the speakeasies were the illegal bars that sprang up right really at the beginning of Prohibition and flourished throughout the Prohibition years. But this exhibit is a lot more than just drinking, whether legal or illegal. It really goes into the jazz age and talks about the music of the time. It talks a lot about the role of women overall in this time period. Now, you don't want to forget that the 19th Amendment, which followed, of course, the 18th Amendment outlawing alcohol, allowed women the right to vote. And the 19th was ratified just a year after the 18th was ratified. And women were a big part of course, both efforts, Prohibition and women's suffrage. Women also had a whole new role during the Prohibition era in the 1920s. Women really began to assert themselves during this era, not just politically with the right to vote, but also culturally and socially. And speakeasies were a big source of that and a big manifestation of that. Women were going out to bars with their husbands, which did not happen before, and so they were socially drinking, which really was a taboo before that. The dancing and everything, the Charleston was one of the main dances at the time, was almost scandalous and would have been considered scandalous just a decade before, but they became commonplace. So you really had great social upheaval at the same time, and so this exhibit talks about that as well. Organized crime is another huge part of this exhibit and a huge part of the Prohibition era. And organized crime existed before Prohibition, but it was Prohibition that really financed that organized crime far more than any other illegal activity could. And so they really entrenched themselves, and even after the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, they were a force to be reckoned with and still are in some places today. The 1920s are really known for just a few really big events. Of course, in Florida, the land boom, it was the time of Prohibition, but also it was the jazz age. It was the real rise of jazz music and blues music. And it's really a truly American art form, one of the first truly American art forms. And they really went hand in hand, jazz music and these speakeasies, illegal drinking and going out dancing. And jazz music was really the soundtrack for the Prohibition era. It also was an interesting time because it's an art form founded in large part by African Americans. And so you had African American musicians playing in white clubs, and you had white people going to black clubs to hear jazz music. And so you had a real cross-mixing of cultures and the races, which you hadn't really had before. And all that was fueled by this illegal alcohol. And so it's a really interesting time and a really interesting mix of kind of people and cultures, and all really looking for a good time, which just a few years before would have been perfectly legal, but because Prohibition, it was completely illegal. At the beginning of the exhibition here at the History Center, we put in a little local component because the exhibition itself is very national in scope. It looks at the big picture of Prohibition, and we wanted people to see what it was like here in Tampa and Hillsborough County during Prohibition. And so we had all of the things that the country had, but obviously a little smaller scale. But we also were a key point of importation for illegal alcohol because of our coastline. And also, Tampa was a very wet place before, with a lot of drinking going on. It was Hillsborough County was one of only 4 counties in all of Florida that still allowed drinking on the eve of Prohibition. But also, during Prohibition, it was a great source for illegal alcohol, not only coming in from the coast, but also being made out in the country. There were lots and lots of stills out in the rural areas, which really weren't that far away from the urban environment. So people could get alcohol in a lot of different ways. We have on the horizon a interesting exhibit, also a traveling exhibit from the Charles Schulz Museum. And you might recognize Charles Schulz as the creator of the Peanuts comic strip, and it's a Christmas-themed exhibit on Merry Christmas, Charlie Brown, the long-running animated Christmas cartoon. And so we're very fortunate to have that. It only travels a couple times a year, obviously around Christmas time. And so we actually booked that years ago, knowing we wanted to have that kind of Snoopy Christmas exhibit. And then after that, also going on with the theme of holidays in the area, we have a Art of Piracy exhibition opening up right around the time of Gasparilla. And so it's a pirate art exhibit. It's reflecting on the ways that piracy has been depicted in artwork in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so we've got lots of great artwork that go with that, plus some things about Gasparilla mixed in. So that's what's coming up here at the History Center.